to the Wildlife for Lunch series. This is Cassie Sheffer from the Texas Wildlife Association, and today we're going to talk about native prairie restoration, and it's presented by Forrest S. He is the project coordinator for the South Texas Natives Project at the Cesar Claiborne Wildlife Research Institute at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. Wildlife for Lunch series is made possible through funding provided by the San Antonio Livestock Exposition, Inc. It's also hosted by the Texas Wildlife Association and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. We know there are several of you out there that you are joining us to gain CEU credit for your pesticide applicator's license. To do so, you must attend this live webinar. And then after the program, you will receive a post-webinar survey. You must provide your name, address, an applicator's license, or your driver's license number in the survey. As soon as we receive that information, you will be emailed your certificate in about 7 to 10 working days. So with that, again, if you do have questions throughout the program, go ahead and chat them to all participants, and I will field those to Forrest. So this time, Forrest, I'm going to go ahead and pull up your presentation here. And Forrest, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor. So hopefully your mic is working and on right now.
Yes, thank you, Cassie. Is the audio coming through fine?
I believe so. I can hear you. I think you're good to go.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. I want to thank the Texas Wildlife Association, Texas AgriLife Extension, and the San Antonio Livestock Show for sponsoring this program. It's a great opportunity to share my experiences with prairie restoration with a broad audience, and I look forward to helping each of you with projects you may be considering. As Cassie said, I'm the coordinator director of the South Texas Natives Project and the Texas Native Seeds Projects, both housed at the Cesar Claiborne Wildlife Research Institute. And our program's roles are to develop native seed sources for use in Texas, and we also do a substantial amount of restoration research. We try to figure out the methods and techniques that landowners and agencies can use to restore native prairies and native habitats. So today I'm going to give you kind of a 30,000-foot overview of restoring native prairies and try to give you some ideas of the challenges you'll face if you want to attempt to restore native prairies in Texas, give you some basis for convincing you why trying to restore native prairies is a good idea. And some of those ideas are listed on the screen right now. Probably with this group and throughout the state with today's land uses, restoring wildlife habitat is probably the biggest impetus towards restoring prairies, primarily for grassland species like bobwhite quail. I suspect more prairie restoration in Texas is driven by the desire to have productive quail habitat than any other use. But there's other reasons why restoring prairies is a good idea for a landowner or an agency, particularly for many private landowners. Land value being driven today by wildlife uses and recreational uses is benefited by prairie restoration in many cases. There's undeniable conservation value to native prairies and restoring native prairies. Native prairies in general in North America are one of the most imperiled ecosystems. We've lost millions of acres of prairies, and working to restore those is a conservation benefit for us individually and society as a whole. Native prairies and native rangelands make up the biggest grazing resource in the state of Texas. In many areas where improved forages or other intensive systems aren't possible because of soil limitations, rainfall amounts, native plants and native prairies provide resources for beef cattle production and livestock production. Land use changes are a big factor promoting prairie restoration. No longer are ranch lands and rangelands looked at from a standpoint of providing forage only for livestock. Increasingly, these lands have value for ecosystem services, for watershed protection, carbon sequestration, recreation. Those things are very important to today's landowners, and something that interests a lot of us. There's, in some cases, significant economic incentives to doing prairie restoration. When the process of restoring prairies has value to many agencies and policymakers, and landowners have the opportunity to be rewarded for those efforts. And of course, something that's very important to many of us when we think about our heritage and our history in Texas, there's a great intrinsic value that's hard to put a dollar figure on or a true metric on, and that's the intrinsic value of prairies. Prairies shaped the history of our state. They shaped much of the settlement of early people and later on as European people settled Texas. So there's great value in prairie restoration from that standpoint. So how do you restore a native prairie? A lot of times when we talk about restoration, the thing that pops in most people's mind is to run out and buy a bunch of seed and plant it and restore the prairies that way. Well, there's also the mindset of doing not much of anything and waiting for a prairie to heal itself. And so there's prairie restoration that's going on all around us and going on, being done by many of you, and that you may not think of as restoration. Things like grazing management influences prairie restoration greatly. There's many ranches in the state that have historically been overgrazed, and simply reducing livestock numbers can result in fantastic prairie management. Brush management. Prairies generally are defined as some sort of relatively open land cover without dense brush. Simply removing brush from many areas of Texas will result in good prairie restoration. Where we've planted or where exotic grasses have invaded, managing those plants and reducing them in the system or attempting to eliminate them can also result in a very beneficial restored prairie. And last, prescribed fire is perhaps the most underappreciated factor in maintaining prairies historically. Much of the state has not had prescribed fire or wildfire, any fire of any sort, for decades, if not centuries in some places. And so an integral part of prairie existence is driven by fire, and oftentimes reintroducing the management tool of prescribed fire will do a great job to restore a prairie. The pictures on the screen represent the place that I was fortunate enough to grow up on in central Texas near Goldthwaite. And so I had the opportunity to grow up in the middle of a prairie restoring itself around me. And the first picture is when that place was purchased, typical working cross timbers and prairies ranch, heavily grazed, fairly open, plant community dominated by plants like Prairie, red Brahma, those type of plants. And after the first part of my lifetime, about 25 years of that place changing focus from a livestock production place to a place that was valued for recreation and wildlife. The photo below was taken a few years ago on that same piece of property with basically a little blue stem Indian grass prairie that many people would be very, very happy with. And so there's an example of something that wasn't reseeded, just a change in the management. So when we talk about restoration, time and money are big factors. You can go down two roads, basically, like I talked about before. A passive restoration mindset, where you're not going to go do a bunch of stuff. You're going to typically let natural successional patterns take over and heal the land on its own. That more passive style of restoration is typically going to take a long time. And as you go to an area that gets less and less rainfall further west in Texas, the period of time for that to occur is going to be longer and longer generally. And broad rainfall and weather patterns greatly dictate those responses. One of the pitfalls of that passive restoration strategy is that in some cases it may not work, and there may be problems with invasive plants or unwanted plants that will keep that piece of property from naturally healing itself without some man intervention. Your more active forms of restoration, what many of us think of as actual prairie restoration, is generally, comparatively speaking to other land management actions, a generally high-cost exercise. It's really hard to do really involved, active, traditional restoration seeding type projects for less than $100 or even much more than that per acre. But the benefits of that are generally faster responses and faster results. Instead of waiting for results to happen in a lifetime, results in under a decade are very possible. But with that cost, there's a lot of cost share programs and government-sponsored programs to help you. And I've listed a few of those, and you can do research on those. This picture represents what I call a hard to decide what to do strategy. And it's a piece of rangeland, a piece of prairie formerly, that's common across Texas. A place that's dominated by native plants, but a lot of them are not your high-value prairie plants like little bluestem. If you look in the center of the picture where I circled is a little population of little bluestem, your dominant prairie plant on a lot of our prairies. And you can see there's some of that there. This is a case I wanted to show you and illustrate that in this case a passive restoration mindset would be a really good idea. There's the components of that system are there, and with a little bit of added management activity and time, you could have it heal very well to a good native prairie. Here's an example of two sites side by side that we studied, where one we took an active restoration mindset and the other a passive restoration standpoint. The active restoration activity here on this piece of old cropland resulted in a good native grassland, a lot of plant diversity, forbs, grasses, a few woody plants, just a good result. But on the bottom, in the passive restoration mindset model, what we had was a monoculture of old world bluestems form. And in that case, from a wildlife standpoint and a diversity standpoint, not a real productive system. And so in that case, the active restoration model was definitely the one to take. So with passive restoration, it's something you want to use if the desired prairie is not there because of something we as humans have done, typically, because of past management or environmental stress. So when brush control is all that's needed, or prescribed fire needs to be reintroduced, grazing intensity reduced, those are good passive restoration candidates. And I'll say this over and over, there's many areas that reseeding is not necessary to restore prairies on those sites. That's something to always keep in mind when looking at a project. But there are a great number of instances where an active restoration mindset, including things like seeding, is a good idea to be successful. And really severely overused, abused landscapes fall in that category. Areas that have had severe soil erosion and loss of natural seed banks are good candidates. Obviously, intensively managed and improved pastures. I say improved in that that's a general term that people label highly intensively managed forage crops like Bermuda grass, Bahia grass, others. In some other cases, basically if you don't have a seed bank left, such as on an engineered soil or a right-of-way, often active restoration is what you're going to have to do. So here's an example of a large landscape, large tract size that was farmed for about 60 years. And without active restoration in the form of reintroducing seeds of the plants that you want there, that's a landscape that's never going to probably progress to a native prairie state without some help. So I'm going to spend most of the rest of the time talking about active restoration, talking about the things you need to be aware of and consider when you do come onto one of those scenarios where that active restoration project and reseeding may be part of the management plan. And I broke that into 4 parts, basically site history, plant material, equipment and planning, and management after you've reseeded it. Site history is very, very important. That's something that you need to spend a lot of time on and really work to formulate a plan in a direction that you want to go in and make sure it's something that the land can support and that's realistic. There are areas that are so severely degraded that really easy, successful restoration is not something that should be taken lightly and that you should jump into. And often that will go back to soils. Soils are the basis for plant growth, and soils with really altered chemistry or that have eroded badly over time can be very difficult to be successful on. But luckily we have a great resource in the NRCS, based in nearly every county in Texas, that these guys are the soil experts. They're the people to consult on those things and use them. That's what they're there for. Another great tool in figuring out if your prairie restoration is likely to be successful is to look at relic sites nearby on similar soils and consult historical information. There's areas that never were a prairie, probably, traditionally. And trying to restore one to those sites now is probably not going to be successful. But there's a lot of other areas that throughout Texas that were prairies and savannas, and that restoring them to those states is very doable. Another tool from the NRCS is their ecological site descriptions and ecological site states. These models and descriptions will tell you what, based on the knowledge we have, what the potential plant community and type of community it was historically. So ask yourself before you start, can you do what you want to do? And again, do you need to reseed? And if you are going to consider seeding, can you prepare a good seed bed, and can you get the right seeds of the right plants to use for that project? So we have to realize there's different types of prairies throughout the state. This would be a typical example of a north central Texas prairie that many people would like to restore, and what much of that area historically looked like, probably. This is a picture of a Gulf Coast prairie south of Kingsville here where I live, dominated by seacoast bluestem, big bluestem, obviously a rare community and a really special place. Tall grasses like big bluestem give it a great effect. But another prairie that's common in South Texas, particularly in parts of West Texas and South Texas, a saline prairie dominated by short grasses like whorl dropseed and curly mesquite. So those are all 3 very different prairies, and we wouldn't by any means try to restore the same plants to all of those. So keep in mind the importance of your site dictating what you're going to do in your project. If seeding is going to be part of the equation, good site preparation and seedbed preparation is critical. Just going out and broadcasting seed over a degraded area is rarely something that's just hands down successful. It is done a lot throughout the West. You'll hear of aerial seeding after wildfires that's debatably successful. But having a good seed bed for those seeds that you put out there to establish in and grow into, and to also have not too much competition there for those new seeds to germinate and persist is very important. One of the most important things in any seeding or restoration project is that if you have undesirable plants on that target site, you have to control them before reseeding. And that means addressing the plants that are there today, addressing the seed banks of those plants, and also, particularly for smaller projects, addressing the adjacent stands of those same plants. You want to take them out of the equation as much as you can to give the plants you desire on the site the best chance of dominating it. And when you do seeding, firm, even seed beds are very important. The two pictures on this slide, the top one represents what I would consider an ideal seed bed. A very flat, uniform surface that obviously you can't prepare in every case, but if you want a goal to work towards, that would be a great site to be seeding on. The bottom one represents kind of a marginal seed bed. You can see there's a lot of dead plant litter there, a lot of clods, a lot of unevenness. So when your seeds are put out there on that site, some are buried 3 inches deep, some are on top of those clods. Water will not hold evenly in that seed bed to promote germination. So that's something to think about on site preparation. The second part I'm going to go over and go over in a little more detail than the others because it's the area I primarily work in and focus a lot of my professional efforts in, and that's native plant materials. There's a lot of questions to ask yourself when you decide to do a seeding project and you go into the marketplace and want to purchase native seeds. What is it? Seems like a kind of an elementary question, but it can be very important, and I'll illustrate that. Where did it come from is perhaps more important than anything else. Also important, though, is what else is in the bag with the seed that you're buying, what's the quality of the seed you're buying, and how to protect yourself and make good purchases when it comes to native plant materials for restoration. What is it? Obviously, hopefully you'll be able to determine the type of prairie you want to restore on a site and the species you want to reseed. And oftentimes in much of the state, Cytoxgrama is one of the plants that you'll come to that you'll find will be a good part of a seed mix. It's the state grass of Texas, a very cosmopolitan species across habitats, but not all Cytoxgrama seed that you could buy is the same. There's actually two types of Cytoxgrama that grow in Texas. You've got a short rhizomatous form that grows similarly to buffalo grass and curly mesquite, and then you've got a caspitose or bunchgrass form. And where those two plants grow is very different. The rhizomatous form, the sod-forming type, generally grows in deeper soils and prairies, traditional prairies that we think about, whereas the bunchgrass form will grow typically in drier sites in the western part of the state and or shallower soils or soils with less water holding capacity. So picking the right type of Cytoxgrama from a botanical standpoint is important. Also important is that you can probably buy 20 different kinds of Cytoxgrama in the Southwest. Many of those come from Texas, many don't. Success of your project will be greatly impacted by choosing the right type of Cytoxgrama for your site and the right variety of seed for your site. And that will hold true for most native plant materials. So where it came from is very important. You want plants that are adapted on day one to your site. You'll hear some seedsmen say, well, buffalo transferred seed from Kansas to Texas, and some germinated and persisted and adapted, and that's very true. That did happen. But what we're looking for in most cases today is now performance. We want plants that are adapted to our site on day one that will thrive and give us results. Native is a very relative term. Native to some means native to North America. Obviously, Cytoxgrama from North Dakota, most people wouldn't consider that native to Central Texas. So keep that in mind. They can sell native seed, but it's not native everywhere. The location of the seed company very often, typically, has nothing to do with where the seed they sell originated from. Now, they may grow their seed in that area, and under a production system where they're producing seed, that plant may be doing very well. But that does not translate to a dry land prairie planting. So be very careful of not thinking that where the seed company is where the seed is from. That seed could have originated from many places all over the country, and they're just simply growing it there for production, or they've bought it from another dealer and are reselling it. Ask and demand answers. I'm a big stickler for this, that if a dealer can't tell me the source of the seed he sells, I typically won't use it in our project. You want proof that it's going to work for your project. It's a big expenditure, and you want to make sure of that. There's some really good objective resources out there. The USDA NRCS Plant Materials Centers. There's one in Knox City, Texas, one in Nacogdoches, Texas, and one in Kingsville, Texas. These guys have developed and released a lot of the seed varieties you'll see for sale, and they can give you the best information out there on where seeds will work and who good growers are and so forth. The programs I direct are also objective resources that are available. We've tested many of these seed varieties and can give you the results of our research. So just let's look at it from a climate standpoint. A lot of the academic research that's been done on how far you can move a plant material selection and it still be well adapted to the rainfall and the climate, temperature, freeze dates. This map basically illustrates that with several types of Cytoxgrama that you'll run into for sale in Texas. You can see varieties like Haskell that are used throughout the state, excellent varieties. They're ideal area of adaptation, which would cover a lot of projects in Texas. But if you were to get Vaughn Cytoxgrama, which comes from a higher elevation site in New Mexico, from a climate standpoint, it's not going to be real well adapted to most of Texas. So just keep that in mind and know the history of the seeds you're buying and know where it came from, because it does matter. You also want to know what's in the bag, and the way to do that is to use certified seed grown by certified producers, certified by the Texas Department of Agriculture. There's lots of intricacies in seed sales, and I won't go into all of them, but there is room that in certain products other crop seed is permitted, and something like KR Bluestem, a plant that nobody doing prairie restoration wants, could be in that bag with your native seed. Most dealers are going to make absolutely sure that it isn't, but you want to know for sure that it isn't. Inert matter is a big thing to think about. When you buy seed on a poundage basis, you want your money going towards seed, not sticks and leaves and non-filled seeds. And what tells you what's in the bag is a standard called percent PLS. And without that measure of pure live seed, is what that stands for, you really can't calculate a planting rate, estimate the value of your purchase, compare the cost of one bag of seed to another, or later on eliminate poor quality seed as being a reason for failure. So again, prove it. Buy good seed and look for tags from the Texas Department of Agriculture. Look for tags that give PLS values to you as a consumer. And if you buy certified seed and from certified seed growers, you'll get that PLS information. If you're doing an extremely large project, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and retest that seed and make sure that you've got good quality seed for your project. So 2 examples here on why PLS matters. You'll see Side-Oats grama occasionally for sale on a bulk pound basis at about $10 a pound. That 50-pound bag of seed is going to cost you retail price of $500. If you've got a 25% PLS in that lot of seed, the actual value of that it might only be $125 for plantings. But if you had a 63% PLS, the actual value would have been $310. So if you're buying native seed on a bulk poundage basis, you really don't know what you're getting. But if you're buying it on a PLS basis, if you need 100 pounds of pure live seed of Side-Oats grama and you buy it on a PLS basis, you'll know that every dollar is going towards that. So keep that in mind as you shop for seed for projects. I hear this sometimes, a seed to seed, isn't it? Does it matter? And there's different types of seed and plant materials. There's things called cultivars, which are generally intentionally selected types of a plant. You have selected germplasms, which are basically collections from wild populations that have been screened for good traits for restoration. And then you'll also have wild harvested seed, which is basically a harvest of a good pasture of that plant. There's a lot of arguments over which is ecologically best. Cultivars, because they are often modified genetically by a lot of traditional prairie restorationists, they're not favored. But in some cases, they may be all that's available, and they're probably a good fit in many cases. Selected germplasms generally are somewhat of an improvement over a wild harvested material, in that a selected plant material has known traits that will be beneficial for restoration, like good seedling vigor, a good defined area of adaptability. So in the end, origin often has more to do with success and which will work best versus the name of it. It's kind of a personal choice, and you won't have all 3 of those options for any given place. So use the best adapted, most locally originating seed, and that's the best guidance I can give you. There are other options. You can go out and pick your own or harvest your own from local stands, but be careful that if you try that, you do it in exceptionally wet years and years with good seed quality, or you may pick a bunch of seed and it not be very viable. I want to go back and show you, these pictures are both of big blue stem at a research planting here in South Texas. The one on the top is Earl Big Blue Stem, which is a cultivar from Central Texas near Weatherford. And when you move that Big Blue Stem to South Texas and plant it, you get a little mini Big Blue Stem grow. That's about a foot tall and fully seeded out in the middle of summer, and a plant that's not going to persist and doesn't perform like little blue stem should. On the bottom is a selection of Big Blue Stem from South Texas that's locally adapted to the site that it's on, and you can see it's 7-8 feet tall, thriving, doing well, which is what you would expect Big Blue Stem to look like. So that's how important seed origin can be. Another thing I wanted to talk about are seed mixes. You want a combination of plant species in any prairie restoration seed mix. And just a basic science figure, we correlate success with 10+ species as being dramatically better than a mix with just 2 or 3 species even. If you expand to maybe 25 or 30 species if that's possible, I think your success will also go up. And even if your end goal is that little blue stem Indian grass prairie, you have to realize that there's other species that have to play a role on that site that you need to plant in order to get to that little blue stem and Indian grass stage. And ecologists define a lot of plant species as early, mid, or late successional species. But know that any prairie is going to be made up naturally of hundreds of species, and good diversity in your seed mix is needed in order to restore that. Just a real rough example, say the Texas Hill Country, a successional pattern that you would want to mimic within your seed mix and something you want to occur on your site. But after a piece of ground is disturbed, naturally what comes back first are wildflowers and weedy grasses. So if you're dealing with a disturbed site that you're going to seed, the plants best fit to colonizing at first are going to be those same ones, the wildflowers, weedy grasses. From there, as the soil stabilizes and builds in health and nutrients, mid grasses like silver blue stem, meadow drop seed, buffalo grass will begin to take hold and further mature that community. You'll have different forbs, different grasses in that stage than you did in the first one. And then finally, you can transition to that climax or dominant prairie state where your grasses like little blue stem and Indian grass will do well. So keep that in mind as you develop a seed mix. So just a quick summary on some of the really important things for plant materials when considering prairie restoration is that you want to use adapted native seed. The origin of that seed, the wild origin of that material is very, very important to whether or not it's going to work well on your site. You want to use the correct botanical form of plant for your site also. And go to the resources that I've suggested and I'll suggest at the end to find those things out. Buy your seed from a reputable dealer. Seed cost is generally one of the biggest parts of a restoration project, and you want to make sure you get that part right. Only buy seed on a pure live seed basis only. I've rarely seen a case where I would be comfortable buying seed on a bulk pounds basis. So ask for percent PLS of any seed lot you're considering. Whenever possible, you learn a lot and can have a lot of confidence in your material if you're using certified seed or a named variety or selection of that plant. There's much more information known about what you're using when you use those than if you use just a native cytostroma from somewhere in Texas. That leaves a lot open to failure when you buy seed that way. You want clean seed. You don't want, obviously, exotic plant seed or noxious weed seed in the material you buy. And buying certified seed or from certified seed growers can ensure that. In the end, I think origin and quality are more important than the name or type necessarily of that seed source. You can have fantastic success with wild harvested seed, with selected seeds. It's just a matter of you've got to plant these seeds where they're adapted, and you need high quality seed for high quality results. And again, I want to make this point several times, is restore the right prairie. The middle photo there is a big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass prairie. What a lot of us think of is the prairie that used to occur all over Texas, and with bison in it and a great tallgrass prairie ecosystem. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of Texas didn't grow that prairie. It grew different types of prairies, shortgrass prairies, midgrass prairies, different types of savannas, some prairies dominated by forbs and lagoons. So pick the right prairie to restore on your piece of ground. So the third part, and I'm going to touch on this fairly briefly. There's a lot of other information out there that you can find from plant materials centers and extension agents about equipment to use for active prairie restoration projects and planting techniques. But in general, and if it's possible, using a native seed drill that's specifically manufactured to plant these small native seeds is going to be superior to broadcast planting. That's not to be said that broadcast planting doesn't work. It can work. You want to have a certain type of seed bed. You want to drag it or pack it afterwards. But whenever possible, use a specialized seed drill if you can. You always want to calibrate whatever equipment you're using to the specific seed mix you have. And there's lots of experts at NRCS and AgriLife Extension that know how to do those things and can give you extension publications that teach you how. But always calibrate your equipment to your seed mix. As far as finding equipment to use, a lot of times the seed companies you buy the seed from are the best point of contact. They obviously deal with a lot of projects and usually know contractors or people that lease equipment. Some of them even lease equipment to use, and they know how to help you set it up and calibrate it as well. There's some soil and water conservation districts throughout the state that have equipment or know people that do that can help you. They're good people to contact locally. There's even some wildlife management cooperatives that have really taken the lead in getting equipment for their members and other people in their area to use. So if you have one of those great groups in your area, contact them. And then finally, local farmers a lot of times have a lot more knowledge about prairie restoration, even though they might not have called it that when they did it, than you would think. A lot of CRP acreage was established and planted with a lot of the same techniques and things that I've talked about here. So there could be good resources all around you. Just put out the word and see if you can find it, or contact my group or others, and we'll point you in the right direction. There's some major planning considerations that factor into success. Again, calibrating equipment. You need to know the amount of seeds you're putting out per acre. It in the end determines the kind of stand you get and the success you'll have. In nearly all cases, planting seed at the recommended seeding rate is going to be fine and adequate. Oftentimes more seed, particularly in dry soils or drier areas of the state, more seed is not better. More seed than is recommended will result in too much competition between those plants, and you won't be as successful. Pay attention to seed placement. Using the right equipment is the best way to do that. When you don't want to plant, obviously during a prolonged drought, generally in the southern areas of the state, fall plantings, according to our research, work best in really clean seed beds that don't have a lot of weeds, or in areas further north in the state, it seems like spring plantings work well. In the end, a long-term success, and I'm saying long-term, 5 years from planting, planting date is not greatly correlated with success. So finally, I'm going to walk through management. After you've made the right choice of seeds, after you've planted them the right way and the community begins to establish, I'm going to take you through some of the things you'll run into in almost every prairie restoration project, and things that you'll have to make decisions on and know how to do. And as I walk through those things, there's a picture that's going to change on the right, and that's an actual project we did in western South Texas, restoring basically a shortgrass prairie to that site. But the first picture there was taken right after planting, and you can see some burn residue there that was used to burn off some of the old residue on that site before planting. Being patient when you restore native grasslands and native prairies is very important. Native seeds and native plants aren't like corn and milo and cotton. They've not been bred for thousands of years to germinate 15 days after they're put in the right temperature of soil. These seeds generally won't germinate until a significant rainfall event. And that rainfall event also has to be during a period of time that physiologically that seed is able to germinate. So you have to have the right soil temperature, maybe even the right day and night cycle, right length of daylight during the day. And so bottom line, it usually takes at least a year, typically often more, to see really significant establishment after a seeding. If you get copious rainfall right after seeding, you can see it happen overnight. But on average, 2 to 5 years is a realistic timeline for most seeding projects. And you'll see the picture that's up there now was a few months after we seeded that site. And basically what we had come up were a bunch of weeds and a few of the annual things that were in that seed mix, but not a prairie yet by most people's definition. A question that comes up generally is, should you control weeds? In that picture before, you can see there was a pretty good weed canopy established on that site. This picture is about 3 months after that. After a hard freeze, those weeds are gone. And so in that case, you didn't need to control those weeds. The guidance I generally give people is if your seeded plants are noticeably doing poorer in weedy areas versus unweedy areas, some weed control may be good to do. But generally, the more diverse type of planting you have, if you have a lot of forbs and grasses in a mix, you don't have a lot of weed control options because herbicides aren't selective enough to control the weeds but not also hurt what you planted. So then mowing is often what's suggested, and mowing's generally fine, can be beneficial. The main thing you want to do is to mow before a big accumulation of weed biomass gets produced. You don't want to mulch those little grass seedlings that are down there below. Another thing you'll run into is grazing. When do you go? Is it safe to go back in and graze that restored prairie? Obviously, grazing is a natural part of many prairie systems and something that a lot of people have a goal of doing on their prairies. It's very important to allow a root system to develop. Those newly seeded plants may take up to a year, maybe 3 years to develop a root system where they've stored enough nutrients and carbohydrates to withstand grazing. Another thing to think about is that you have no seed bank on a restored site within a year, generally, except what you planted. And so you want to allow those plants that you reseeded to mature, produce seed, and drop it on the ground and begin to replenish a seed bank. There are cases where if you have a lot of exotic grasses or things like buffalo grass, or Bermuda grass even, where specific targeted grazing for weed control can be very useful, but use caution with that even. Generally, complete deferral of a reseeded site is good for about 3 years, and even after 3 years, a well-managed, moderate to light grazing system is best. You can see the picture up top. That was about 9-10 months from seeding on that particular project, and it looks really good, but it was probably not even at that standpoint ready to be grazed yet. And the bottom shows a planting that was grazed within 6 months of planting. You can see outside of that exclosure, those plants have been hit really hard and probably won't do well long term. Many of them will die, whereas inside that exclosure, you've got good progress going on. Prescribed fire is something that I'm very cautious with on a restored site, particularly where you have exotic grasses like buffalo grass or King Ranch bluestem. A lot of those exotic grasses seem to be very well adapted to particularly dormant season fires. Growing season fires, it may be a different story, but those are typically pretty tough to do in most of Texas. But again, you want to allow a good seed bank and a good root system of your plants to develop before you hit them with a disturbance like fire. It's hard to put a definite calendar date on when you can go back in and begin prescribed fire, but let plant establishment, plant health, and preceding rainfall dictate that. If you've done a restoration project in a dry time, it's going to take longer. So, but eventually, maybe 2 years, 3 years, 5 years is out, fire is obviously a major tool of maintaining a prairie ecosystem. Exotic grasses, one of the biggest limiting factors to prairie restoration. And the key is, if you're going to reseed a site, control things like Bermuda grass, KR blue stem, buffalo grass, as well as you can before you start restoration. If you do that, even still after you reseed your prairie plants, you're probably going to see exotic grasses come back in again. And it's important to identify them very early and spray or mechanically remove them as early as possible. Exotic grasses in a lot of Texas are going to be just like brush. There's going to be no eradication silver bullet that works, and you're going to have to do continued diligence and continued management to keep them suppressed or keep them from being a problem to maintaining and establishing native plants. And after severe disturbance events, be very diligent. After you do implement fire or grazing, be careful to see what response occurs with these introduced plants. So just some examples, and I'll wrap things up. Hopefully we'll have some time for questions. A mid-grass prairie restoration project, good seed bed, good adapted seed sources. About 2 years from the top photo is the one on the bottom. A system that looks pretty good and is very successful. This is a photo, again, about 2 years from planting, or 2 years between those pictures, of a shortgrass, grama, windmill grass type prairie that was restored. Again, just an example that you can do it. And finally, kind of a mid-tallgrass prairie in northern South Texas. This was a site that was dominated by buffalo grass. And if you look in the top photo, you'll see there's a line down about the middle of that picture where the grass on the one side is brown and dead, and the other it's been plowed up and looks different. Those were two different treatments basically to prepare a seed bed and control the exotic grass. And the picture at the bottom is taken basically from the same perspective, and you can see both worked. And I hope that's an example that there's more than one way to get to success, and just to let your site and the plants you're dealing with dictate that. I'm not going to go through these, just a recap of what I've talked about, some of the things to really keep in mind and really pay attention to if you want to have a successful, active prairie restoration project. With that, I guess we'll get Cassie back in here and answer any questions. I'm going to go to the next slide, and my contact information and links to some of the people I mentioned during the presentation for information will be up also. So thank you all for listening.
All right. Well, thank you, Forrest. I've been keeping the questions going throughout the program, so some are actually going back to some of your beginning topics. So we're going to go ahead and start off. And folks, if you do have questions, please go ahead and type them to all participants, and I will ask them in the order in which they are received. So the first question is from George, and his question is, it says, I am a big proponent of fire as a tool for brush management and grass promotion. I have pastures intermixed with little bluestem, bushy bluestem, not root bristlegrass, etc., and KR bluestem. How can I enhance the natives and not allow the KR to take over?
That's a good question, George, and something I wish I had a better answer to, and I know many of us in the research community wish we had a better answer to. Old world blue stems are very tough to manage against versus native vegetation because of many of those old world blue stems originated from areas that probably had more severe disturbance regimes than we ever had in a lot of Texas. And so KR blue stem, Clayburgh blue stem, they thrive on disturbance, and fire is obviously a disturbance. Drought's a disturbance, so you can see why these old world blue stems are invading and doing so well, particularly in the last decade. If fire is going to be part of your system, I would concentrate on the periods of the year where KR blue stem doesn't do as well necessarily as your natives. And what some of the research that's been done has shown is that the growing season fires or fires outside of kind of the traditional time that most people do prescribe fire in Texas are best. That said, it's hard to recommend that, and even harder to implement it because of the danger of doing those type of fires. Also, you get into that it's rare that you have a year that you can burn a pasture in Texas in September or more into the summer. It's just hard to get a safe fire prescription or vegetation that's dry enough to burn. And so that would be the only thing I could tell you is to look at the feasibility of growing season fires versus dormant season fires. And I think there's some good research guidance out there from the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And I believe the Balcones Canyon Lands has had some research done there too on the same topic. So those might be resources to look at for that. In my experience, and most of this is from South Texas, dormant season fires will tend to increase old world blue stems, whereas over not burning at all. So I would keep that in mind.
Okay, very good. We have a next question from Charlie T. And this was earlier in the program, and it says, can one start with passive and then supplement that later on with some active restoration? And he asked that question about slide 9,
okay,
if that helps.
Certainly. That's a good point, Charlie. And I think most projects that most people end up doing, they do a combination of the two. The issue with getting real far down the road on passive restoration on a site that might not have been great for that particular model is that it may take a while to find out that you're not going to be successful with it. But obviously, a combination of the two on most properties is going to be your best bet. I tell people to start with the areas that they can have the best bang for their buck on active restoration. Start with those areas that you can get a good seed bed prepared, the ones that you can get equipment into, the ones that you can get the right plants for, the right seeds of. So absolutely, I think starting with one and moving into another would be a great strategy.
All right, very good. And this next question is from Gail. And she asks, any suggestions for dealing with the seed bank from Malta star thistle?
I don't have a lot of direct experience with Malta star thistle. Like a lot of invasive weeds, it's a prolific seed producer and probably has a seed bank that is far and away greater than a lot of the plants you want on that site. And probably most invasive plants have seed banks that are going to greatly exceed the amount of seed you can reasonably plant if you try to restore and outcompete the weed or overseed it. the key to controlling seed banks on any plant is to do repeated treatments over time. Nearly all plants put out some seed that will germinate right away in good conditions, and they also put out some percentage of seed as a survival mechanism that won't germinate maybe for 2 years or could be 6 months, some dormancy period. And so if you're able to go in there and disturb the site where those seeds can germinate, kill them with a herbicide or by retilling, something like that, and then wait and see what happens after the next rainfall event or after the next time you water. And if more seeds come up, kill them again. And when you get to the point that they're not coming back, then you're probably in a good spot to say that you've controlled that seed bank. And that's really the best guidance I can give you on that.
All right, the next question is actually from Gail as well. And she asks, how do I go about resting my pastures for 3 or more years without losing an agricultural appraisal?
I think your best bet there is going to be to talk to somebody with Texas Parks and Wildlife or AgriLife Extension. Those folks know those ag and exemptions in and out and can give you good guidance there. But there should be, if you have a grazing management plan in place for the property, should be room to defer it in periods of drought and still maintain that exemption. Obviously, there's other options such as wildlife habitat exemptions for people that already had existing ag exemptions that could possibly be on the table there. But definitely your local Parks and Wildlife biologist or extension agent in your county can get you going on that topic.
All right, the next one comes from Jim. He asks, how important is it to, or is the control of the deer population in prairie restoration?
When it comes to restoring forbs and legumes, deer can make or break you. That's one of the biggest holdups to being able to restore a lot of those late successional prairie wildflowers or legumes. If those are really important to you, fencing the restored area to keep deer out can be very important, and obviously at a bigger scale, controlling a deer population so that it doesn't put pressure on that prairie planting is a good idea. I've heard people in central Texas, particularly Austin, those areas, that say it's almost impossible to restore some plants because of deer pressure, and that's something to keep in mind. A strategy that might be better on some areas than fencing the whole thing will be to do your planning and your preparation, and then maybe put small protected spots within that larger prairie that the deer can't get to. You know, fence off a little section or put an old roll of wire, something like that, out there so some of those really palatable plants that deer put pressure on will have a chance to grow. But something to keep in mind for sure. Deer tend to go to newly disturbed sites because they know there's food there, and maybe even out of curiosity, and they will put pressure on them. It can be detrimental to restoration success. There's something to be said if you are in an area with just a tremendous number of deer, select the species you use wisely. There are certain prairie plants and forbs and legumes that the deer don't prefer, and you may want to plant those instead of, or put more resources into the ones they don't like than the ones that they really do. On grass plantings and the impact on grasses, there's generally not a lot. Deer obviously aren't big grass eaters in most areas. So.
All right, very good. Our next question, it looks like we have just about 2 or 3 more questions, is from Bill. And he's asking, can you recommend one or two sources for how to identify native Texas grasses versus exotics or invasives? And I think he's talking more about books or websites.
Okay. One good one online, Texas AgriLife Extension has a website, I'm not sure the name of it, on range plants in Texas. That can be a good resource. There's a book called Grasses of the Texas Hill Country. It's a good kind of basic resource for grass identification. There's also a similar book called Grasses of South Texas. And then beyond those, you get into older books that typically have line drawings. I know a lot of the feedback I get from people is that those are hard to use, and I understand that. But one of the classic resources is Frank Gold's Grasses of Texas. It includes almost everything you would find. I can't tell you of any just good definitive resource that will include everything. You have so many grass species, both native and introduced, that it can be tough to nail down. A lot of times in a given area, the NRCS staff will be some of the best grass experts around, and they can usually will know or can send the plant off to someone else to tell them what it is and give you some feedback. Folks like myself generally can point you in the right direction with a good digital picture also. There's many other range people and extension people that look them up, send them an email and say, can you help me identify this with a good picture, and they can help you.
All right. The next question is from Kathy. She asks if you have any experience or information on the success of using seed balls, which she's calling the clay and compost balls, which with the seeds included. Any experience with those on an unprepared site for passive restoration?
I don't have any direct experience with that. I am familiar with some of the research that's been done. There's been some substantial projects in the Western U.S. done on using that mindset and that technique on burned landscapes. And I don't know specifically if it was a success failure consideration or a cost consideration, but I know that technique has not been widely implemented in most of those areas. So there's probably limitations to it. Some of which could be moisture related, they could be seed placement related. That seed ball, when it hits the ground, may or may not result in the seed that's in it being placed correctly so that it can germinate and establish. And that would be one of the concerns I would have with them. But I don't know of any specific research or experience with them in a lot of areas.
All right, very good. And I think, as far as I can see, this is our last question. And the question is from Sid, and it actually has about two parts to it. The first part is, what do you think about the feasibility of overseeding range dominated by increaser species? And have you heard of seedbed planting in strips or patches being a successful method of restoration? It says he's particularly interested in blackland prairie tallgrass restoration.
Okay, both good questions. Overseeding increaser species dominated range, I would assume overseeding with late successional plant species. I've seen it work. I've seen it be fairly successful. It's probably something that's going to be fairly costly, and for the success you will get on average, I think it will be hard to justify doing it. It's going to depend on where you're at and what those increaser species are also. A lot of times if you have good, stable communities of increaser species, it's a pretty good indication that those late cereal species are there, and they're probably in the seed bank, and there's some other pressure keeping them from really being expressed on the site. Maybe grazing intensity, may have been the recent climate, rainfall, those things. So you know, if you have a good, stable community of native increasers, probably overseeding in a lot of cases is not all that necessary. When it comes to a strip or patch orientation in the blackland prairie, I don't have any specific blackland prairie experience, but I know many of the issues there they have are similar to other areas in the state. I mean, there's areas with a lot of Bermuda grass, a lot of King Ranch bluestem, a lot of intensely disturbed soils. My biggest concern with strips is the amount of edge competition you get. You've got to realize that the strip you plow up and plant is going to be affected greatly by the plants immediately adjacent to it, particularly where you have plants like King Ranch bluestem all the way around you. Trying to establish a 20-foot wide strip of natives through the middle of that is basically a losing battle. Those adjacent populations will put out so much seed that your restoration strip tends to get overwhelmed. And so I think the strips can work fine. It's just a matter of what's adjacent to you. When it comes to patches and patch orientation, if that's the question, I tell people that our best success is in the largest orientation to minimize edge. And okay, if a strip maximizes edge, a big square would minimize the amount of planted acreage that's affected by edge. And I almost universally prefer some kind of blocked or large arrangement where we won't have a lot of edge effects over a strip. But you know, when we talk about corridors and things like that being important in some of these degraded landscapes, strips may be the thing we have to look at and find techniques that will work. I think somebody that's done a lot of that work very successfully and knows the ins and outs of it is a guy named Jim Willis with the Wildlife Habitat Federation down in southeast Texas. And they've worked cooperatively with a lot of conservation organizations on a quail co-op to establish native prairie strips to connect fragmented habitats. And, Jim and his group have a good website, a lot of hands-on experience that could guide that type of program.
Very good, thank you. Well, it looks like, Forrest, that was our last question as far as I can tell. So I know we're a bit over time, but Forrest, just wanted to thank you on behalf of TWA and the Texas AgLife Extension for your time and your expertise in your presentation today. And folks, I've put up the several links that you can see in his presentation. I've actually added those to the chat window to give you clickable links. And so with that, I'd just like to again thank you, Forrest, so much for your time today. And actually, we have our next webinar, our Wildlife for Lunch webinar, will be on November 15th. We will have Brian Hayes talking about endangered species management. And I also, any of you would like to view the archived Wildlife for Lunch webinars, I went ahead and put up the link in our chat window as well. We invite you to view those. So again, one more time, thank you, Forrest, for your time. And we hope to see you all again sometime soon. Yeah. Thanks, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you all.